I'd like to welcome to the stage then for our keynote on this section, Mark Bjornsgaard, who is the founder and CEO of Deep Green Technologies. And I think in the interest of time, I'll let you just come on and do your thing. Thank you.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? I'm conscious the microphone is quite far away. Okay, I'm going to try and talk for only 15 minutes, and then I think we've got a panel, and because I've had my 15 minutes, I'll say as little as I can on the panel. My name is Mark Bjornsgaard. I'm the Chief Executive of a business called Deep Green. We are building modular data centers in metro areas, but it is more exciting than just talking about data centers, I promise. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how what we're doing applies to all the good stuff that Open UK has done around patchwork kilt. I'm going to talk a little bit, the first bit of the infographic that describes the patchwork kilt is all about demand, and there's some really interesting drivers around demand and grid constraints that I think are really interesting in our world and what's happening more generally. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're actually doing, applying patchwork kilt in the real world. A lot of what I'm going to say, a lot of all the other good speakers have touched on it. I've even got a pint of Guinness in a slide, and that I had promised I haven't put that in, so we definitely need Guinness to sponsor the next event. Anyway, so I'm going to try and get through part one really quickly, and then we'll get onto the good stuff. A lot of people have elaborated on how much energy the data center industry consumes. That's an interesting part. The really big news is that over the next 10 years, we need between 5 and 10 times the amount of data centers we've currently got to do all the brilliant things we know the robots are going to do for us and all the AI and machine learning. And I think when in 2021, when Patchwork Kilt was done, I mean, we hadn't gone through this kind of existential growth in AI. So the real problem for the data center industry is how do you grow when there aren't enough electrons to go around? It is inconceivable that the data center industry at 3% of our electricity supply in the country could possibly take 15 to 20% of the electricity supply when the whole of the rest of the world is decarbonising and electrifying their heat. So it is a genuine existential crisis for one of our largest industries and one of the biggest emitters. What is the unlock? The unlock is that computers are brilliant electric heaters. They are 97% of the electricity that goes into a computer comes out as heat, and we know that data centers spend 50% of their capex, or up to 50% of their capex and opex, trying to keep the computers cold. 2011, Microsoft, to their credit, absolute credit, wrote a white paper and they coined the phrase data furnace. And all that really meant was that how do we use all this amazing amount of heat that's coming out of computers and how do we recycle that heat? And a lot of others in the community now talk about combined heat capture. So the solution is that wherever we see a heat pump, wherever we see an electric boiler, wherever there is a gas-fired boiler now in the world, we need to put a data center. And if we do that, we don't actually need to put a lot more pressure on the grid, because a lot of the existing supply, a lot of the existing grid infrastructure that we've already got in the ground is sufficient to run smaller data centers, but many more of them. This is what we've done at Deep Green. We've built a supercomputer in Exmouth Leisure Centre. We had our 15 minutes of fame in March. You might have seen my face for radio on the TV. And so we built a supercomputer in the plant room of Exmouth Leisure Centre. I just wanted to do one slide on the physics and engineering. We won't geek out. I'm not technology myself, but it's a beautifully elegant solution. This is a tub about the size of a big washing machine or about the size of that table. We immerse the computers in inert mineral oil. So the computers, you just take a physical computer and put the whole thing in mineral oil. That oil gets hot, gets to about 60 degrees. Convection currents start to form. that oil gets flowed around a closed loop into what's called a heat exchanger. It's 100-year-old technology, and the heat goes from the oil into the swimming pool. We're heating, we will do, by the end of the year, we'll be heating about 62% of Exmouth Leisure Centre for free. It's about £22,000 worth of heat. Now, we framed it rather disingenuously as we are providing free heat, but of course, the host site, when you break up data centres, you stop building them in the middle of nowhere, stop ejecting all that heat into the atmosphere. When you break them up, it turns out that we're actually getting free cooling. You can do it everywhere. This is an enormous idea. If the data centre industry grew to 10 times its current size, we could heat all our homes and offices for free. Often you can do it without a secondary heat source, without a heat pump. In Exmouth, there are fossil fuel boilers. There's a gas boiler there, or multiple gas boilers. Those don't kick in when we're heating the pool. If you're building a district heating system, district heating systems are just very, very large heat loops where thousands of flats and offices extract heat from the same place. When you're doing that, we've got a site in East London. It's about 14 megawatts. We're contributing millions, we will be contributing millions of pounds worth of free heat. And there, we're slaving to a water source heat pump. It's the biggest water source heat pump in Europe. It's taking heat out of the Thames. And there's a kind of misnomer in the data center industry that this is poor heat. Well, if you're pulling heat out of the Thames in the middle of winter, but only, then the heat comes in, the water comes in at a certain temperature. We can prime those heat pumps. So any data furnaces can prime those heat pumps. So this is an enormous change that we think will happen over the next generation, where we, as I say, we'll break up data centers and we'll start to deploy them, as we rather kind of fancifully say, within the kind of fabric of society. 30% of all industrial processes can host a data center. It's a 3.4 trillion retrofit opportunity. So when we all struggle, as we sometimes do, I think, about kind of the existential problems around climate change and sustainability, and I want to talk a little bit about that at the end, then there are enormous opportunities like this, and we are proof positive that it's possible to do this. And since our 15 minutes of fame, we've had thousands and thousands of sites get in contact. Every public swimming pool, every district heating system in the Northern Hemisphere. We could already deploy 10 times the UK's current data center capacity into host sites. And so when we go back to Patchwork Kilt and we say, well, where is this, what's this demand? Actually, like a lot of times in life, what we've actually got is an interesting situation where we need way more than 10 times the capacity of data centers. We need data centers to grow way bigger than that, because the more they grow, the more free heat we've got, and the more interesting local economies get. So to recap, unlimited capacity for data centers. We're welcomed into site. There's no moratoriums. I mean, we had thousands of sites wanting us to arrive because it's free heat. We are quite literally giving people free money. We can build it in days. We build for 20% of the cost of a conventional data center. The power's there, so we didn't upgrade the Exmouth grid. There was already a perfectly sufficient electricity power connection into the grid, and we can profile the thousands of sites we've now got to land at the moment where there's sufficient grid capacity. We pay no board and lodgings. Free cooling, so 50% again of the OPEX of a data center can be cooling the computers down. There's almost none in this scenario, and we are building. If there are any real data center geeks out there, we're building a de facto edge data center, edge network, which has its own really important principles for sustainability. So what's really interesting about this is that I think, and I'm guilty of it, we all get very hung up on driving a sustainability agenda. If it's an economic benefit that's driving this change, fuck it, we're in. It doesn't matter. Let's just use what we've got. So I really like this quote: "What's not efficient for the environment will not be efficient for business." The ESG benefits, of course, we're helping avoid carbon emissions. So when our boilers are on, other fossil fuel boilers aren't on, we're speeding up the energy transition. We know that the costs of a heat pump in this country are quite marginal. Gas is still really cheap. If you slave it with a data furnace, you change the economics of it completely, and then the decision to go from a fossil fuel boiler to a heat pump is easy. We're reducing the dependency on the grid. We can talk a little bit about solar and on-site solar and batteries in a minute. And we're safeguarding really important community assets. We've lost 300 pools in this country already, and there are another half of at risk. So anything we can do to safeguard assets. And in the case of when we deploy to district heating systems, often we're helping vulnerable and social housing, and Ofgem has just had the mandate that developers aren't just allowed to take the money with the free heat that we provide. They've got to now, developers have got to discount their people's heating bills. And lastly, so we're building out this free heat substrate. So there's another, find me on LinkedIn. There's a lot of collateral we've got around how we think local economies are going to change when we all get our heads around the fact that there is free heat at a local level. So we can imagine where different industries get repatriated. We can farm prawns, we can grow insects, we can grow mushrooms with this free heat substrate. I'm conscious of time, but I'll be as quick as possible now. So that's the kind of first bit of Patchwork Quilt's kind of what's going on demand. So demand is obviously exploding, but we do have a solution for it. We'll just go in a little bit about how we're building the carbon neutral data center. So all about decarbonisation. So we're avoiding emissions. As I said, when our boilers are on, other boilers are off, so we are avoiding emissions. It becomes quite interesting when you start to carbon account about how you do that without greenwashing. But in terms of sort of the overall decarbonisation story, of course, of just avoiding emissions, making sure that those fossil fuel boilers aren't on, or that heat pumps are more efficient is really important. On-site solar is super, super important. We've talked a lot about it. People have talked a lot about it already. We have a really interesting advantage. If you've got a 100 megawatt data center, you need 220 acres of solar to run that data center on solar. That land to power ratio, we invert. So it turns out that the average size of a leisure centre car park in the UK is about 2 to 5 acres, which means that by deploying solar into that car park, we can run all of our data centre off-grid. So again, we're sort of taking we're coping with what we've got, the cards we've been given. Rather than trying to kind of create perfect solutions, we're saying, well, look, what have we got? How can the grid cope with this? We're part of that solution. Local traffic is really important. I'm sure a lot of you have probably bumped into an organisation called the Greenie of Streaming. 70% of the internet is cat videos. If you can keep those cat videos being distributed locally, that means that you don't then fire the noughts and ones around the world. It's really interesting stats that the UK's electricity, 3% of it is data centres, 3.5% of it is transmission networks, is the networks that get shuffle the noughts and ones around. So actually keeping things local, and I think one of the speakers earlier was mentioning this, keeping traffic local is probably one of the greenest things we're doing, just making sure everything's not backhauled to the Netherlands or goodness knows where else. Natural cooling, my wife thinks I'm very strange. I've got very into espaliering laurels and how quickly laurels grow. Green facades are super important. They can reduce cooling costs by 40%. We're going to start commissioning artists to build steel frames around our data centers so they look beautiful and green, but also they keep the sun off in winter, in summer even. And of course, we've got our own targets. We're not very good at that yet. Everyone who's asking me about that, I'm saying, give us a year. We will be very good, and we'll talk a little bit about Scope 3 later. Oh, well, in the next slide, actually, we'll see the Guinness in real life. Dematerialization. So we are landing in existing buildings. So our Scope 3 is naturally low. Exmouth Leisure Centre, we are quite literally in the plant room. There are no buildings. There's no concrete to pour. Really important. In other solutions, will be modularized, but again, if you build a modularized data center, it's metal, it's more easily recyclable. We're already using reconditioned hardware, so all our network gear is already reconditioned. I can't imagine this isn't the way the world's going, and we can actually already immerse that as well. So when we talk about those transmission networks, we can already immerse that kit so we can extract the heat from it. Extending lifetimes, again, we've covered this topic. We've got some really interesting data with a partner called Alsys Flight. So when you buy a horribly expensive NVIDIA GPU, they're just eye-wateringly large amounts of money, and theoretically, you amortize that over 3 to 5 years, then they're effectively a free asset, but then, of course, traditionally, no one's wanted them. But actually, if you quantify the price per petaflop, the price of the amount of work that GPU is doing for non-time-sensitive workloads, we actually think you can extend that GPU life to 10 years. And then finally, yes, and I'll come back to the thing. And then finally, we've got our pint of Guinness. So we are offsetting all of our Scope 3 from now. And we were talking over lunch. It's okay if you're the airline industry or if you're a low-margin industry saying you can't offset your emissions. If your gross margins are 50%, which the data center industry's margins are, it's not okay to not just accept responsibility. So we are very, very keen that we are going to accept responsibility. We're paying $75 a ton. They aren't nonsense offsets. They really are real. And to be fair to a couple of the big hyperscalers this week, they've come out with major offsetting programs, which is great, but it is a tiny percentage of the dark bit of the Guinness pint. How am I doing for time? 2 minutes, not bad. Circularity. So, of course, I love this business because there is a beautiful circularity in it, and there's a beautiful kind of reciprocity in it, right? For 7 years, every fucking finance meeting I've been in, the last question has always been, are you sure you don't want to charge for the heat? It's like, no, the whole point of this is, if you don't charge for the heat, you are welcomed in, and then the reciprocity and the kindness loop takes hold. We're recycling hardware, so when it eventually gets to grinding this stuff up, I actually know more about EV batteries than I do about computers at this stage, but certainly EV batteries, we're way better at grinding batteries up, and we can now extract the minerals very, very efficiently from them. It's happening in the data center industry, and we're working with a number of different suppliers on that. And lastly, one thing we really love what we're doing, we're going to announce with Exmouth that the local residents of Exmouth can invest in their local green assets. So I happen to be an investor in a platform called Control Alt, which is a fractional ownership platform where people can fractionally own houses and different assets. We're going to put Exmouth Leisure Centre on the Alt platform, and everyone within a geo-fenced area is going to be able to own their local green assets and earn a return from it, which is again, what we really like about that kind of circularity of it. I'm speaking very fast, but I've got a minute. One final thought. Jim Stockdale was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, and he noticed that, and this is why I talk to my teams quite a lot about this, and I've never done it, I've never spoken in public about this, so we'll see how this goes. He noticed that everyone who came into the prisoner of war camp was, if they were militantly optimistic, they didn't last long. But if they were militantly pessimistic, they didn't last long either. And he said, you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with a discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. And I believe that in the sustainability and the environmental movement, we're a lot of people here, we all know the brutal facts of our reality. We know that the window to save ourselves from environmental chaos and catastrophe is narrowing all the time. My assumption is that we all know this, and I'm not saying for one moment negate it or don't stop talking about it. There are lots of other people who think everything's fine, but what Jim Stockdale would say is, he'd say, get yourself in balance. We need to be better at holding this duality in our minds, because it's not about boosterism, and it's not about sort of stupid positivity, but it's about saying that we know where we are, but where we're going, we could make it. And that's what I love about Deep Green. It is the embodiment of something that everyone seems to get. People have a hot laptop, and they think, yeah, well, actually, that heat going to the swimming pool, that sort of makes sense. So I'm a middle-aged man. I always refer to Star Wars. Rebellions are built on hope. This isn't conspiracy theory rebellions. This is a rebellion in your own mind. We need to be masters of our own mind now. We need to get out of this. We need to stop talking militantly about all the bad stuff that's going. We know how bad it is. Now we need to get on with the solutions. We need to stop making perfect the enemy of good. And if you're in that mindset, talk to us. If you use a data center, if you use a dirty data center, if you have any application, or if you just want to be involved in it, this is your time to shine. Send us an email. Give us your workloads. If you've got on-premise, come and talk to us about how we can host your kit. If you're in the cloud, we've got some really interesting conversations going with the hyperscalers who will allow you to provision your kit through us. I'm not sure that says naught, so I think I've been over-talking, but I think we're there. Thank you very much. Thank you.